Hi YouTube, welcome back to another video from Wtf Rc Cars. So we're going to carry on with the XB8e 22. We got the diffs assembled last time, so we're moving on to the rear suspension, the front and rear diff hubs. I believe we should get done on this one. So we should get the diff housing and the full rear suspension done, hopefully. But let's crack on with it. Right, so continuing on with the XB8e 22 build. So we're moving on to the front and rear differentials, and these, same as quite a few other Xray vehicles, you need to cut the little casting bits out of the diffs and then just clean up both sides. So first thing we're going to need to assemble is the CVD drive shafts. So we want the short one. We're going to need one of his little retaining pins, that, and a cup for the end of it. Then we're going to need one of them to keep everything together, and we're going to need a boot on the end. So let's have a look what we need. So it does say you can use oil on these, but I prefer to use the graphite grease. Seems to work better. You just have to remember to keep them clean. Let's see if I can get it to go through. They do feel like they're not going to go, but you can just pull them over. Then we're going to want a bit of grease on this. So if we get it into position and then grease it, and it's about the only way I've found of doing it without getting covered in it. So then you want it upright, and then we're going to get one of these into position, and then we're going to drop the pin through, and you want to make sure you don't get anything out of line on this. Then we've got one of these, and it says to make sure it's orientated so your two opening holes are away and towards one of the open holes, not ones that you've got your pin in, so you've got good contact. So that basically looks like that is how we're going to assemble it, and then we've just got to work the cover over, keep all this dust out. So that's one assembled. So we're going to use one of these, and these are already oiled, so you want a steel bearing in each side. And then we're going to need one of his grub screws, and these are 2.5mm hex. Then we're going to need a tiny bit of thread lock, and you're going to pop one of your output shafts through. You're going to get that into position, line it up with a flat. Then we're going to want a bit of thread lock on the back of this. So once you've got your thread lock, you can start this screwing down, and if you hold it together, you will feel it when it lines the shaft up on the flat. And make sure it's nice and tight. So that's one we've got in place. This one is going to be the front diff. So let's see, that's the front one. And then the orientation, what it's telling you to do is put the drive gear to that side. And it says it's important not to try and shim these until the vehicle is fully assembled, which was the same with the XT8e. So we want drive gear to that side, so that's going to be the front of the vehicle. Then we're going to want to close this up using the top 2 screws. And I believe these are 2.5mm, yep. And there's definitely a world apart in the strength and quality of the composite parts on this compared to any of the RTR vehicles. They are a hell of a lot stronger components. Right, so last off we've got us graphite grease, and we just need to grease the gears, and this is an awful lot easier to do once it's assembled, and you don't need a crazy amount of this graphite grease because it will spread everywhere. But looking at that, the meshing seems absolutely perfect as is, but it does tell you not to shim it until you've assembled the entire RC. So moving on to the rear. So you need the longest of these. Let's see if we can get this on without any graphite grease on it and put it on afterwards. It might go, yeah. So we stand some chance of not getting absolutely covered in it. So again, we're going to need our little pin. See if we can get lucky and not get covered in graphite grease. Highly unlikely though, because this stuff gets absolutely everywhere. So again, just make sure your pin goes straight down in the middle of the joint, and then you're going to want your little clip. So you can just stretch that over, and they do just clip down into place. And again, you want the closed sides away from your retaining pin. Then should just be able to slide his rubber boot over. Make sure everything sits together nice. Then we're going to need 2 of those steel bearings with a bit of oil in them. And we're going to drop us drive shaft through as output shaft, and then again I'm going to want a bit of thread lock on this. Might need to tighten that up a little bit. Looks like it's moved ever so slightly. I like to try and get them as tight as possible so we don't have too much play. Right, so we're going to want the rear diff in this one, and again it's showing us to put it that way round, so when it's on the rear it'll sit on the opposite side to the front one. So we can close this up now. always like to finish tightening them by hand, and then we want to get as grease onto the rear diff teeth. Just get that a bit of a spin to work it in. And again, there's no play on that one either. So, on the rear diff, it looks like we are fitting the carbon plate, and there's no badges or anything on this. It's identical no matter which way around you put it. So it looks like this is going on, and then it looks like we are mounting it with the bottom two holes. And same as before, finish tightening it by hand. That way we're not stripping any threads or crushing any components. So that is our front and rear diff assembly. So let's see what else we need. Right, so moving on to the rear suspension. So let's have a look what we've got. So it's bag 3, and I'm going to build it all to stock spec. So we've got as rear diff, and then we're going to need a suspension shaft put through each one of his arms, so as hinge pins. So we need to get the hinge pins in position, and it says we're going to need a 2mm spacer on each side as stock. So let's get them into position. And then the longest bolts or screws, they're going to fix the rear plate. So we're going to put the pills in, and we're going for the bottom innermost position on both these. I believe that's the stock setup for it. So it's both these to the inside with the number 1, not the 0.5s. So we're going to need to mount this on the back with the world's longest screws. So that's going to hold everything into position. You've got your 2 set screws that you're going to need to put in, and these are for the droop, and stock setup for this is 2mm. So you can either use a gauge, or you can use one of these little spacers because they're 2mm. So that's one. Right. So that's the position we're going to be in for these. They do the optional domed headed droop screws. So once we've got all that into position, next we're going to want to pop the pills into this front hinge pin bracket. And again, I'm building it to the stock instructions. So we're using the 1 and the innermost lowest position. So I want to get them into position. And you should be able to wiggle it into place. And then we're going to use 2 of the coarse threaded screws, but the short ones this time. So we're going to have to build 2 of these up, and as Xray normally does, they've got a really handy hex head in them, 1.5mm, so you can get them started. So it's the longer ones of these grub screws, and basically you screw these in till they're 6mm, but you can feel it when it goes tight, and then just screw the other side on. And if you imagine where the sway bar is going to come through and then where it's going to fix to it, so we're going this sort of angle, so you can position them quite easily. And again with the other side, yeah, that's going to be somewhere close. So what we need to do now is get 2 of the little countersunk ones, and you're basically going to put the bar into position, and then we're going to use these to trap it. And I prefer to put these little screws in by hand because they're quite fine thread, and I don't want to be over tightening anything and breaking it. And once you've got that into place, we have 2 tiny little grub screws, and these are to take the slack out of the sway bar as it moves through the bracket. These do screw in quite deep, so there's no back and forth movement, just up and down. But you don't want it to be hindering the movement of the sway bar at all. So we then have to fit our little ball joints on the ends. So they're going to go on that way, so we're going to have to put these in first. Yeah, they line up much better. So, are they going on inner or outer? They're going on outer. So, let's get the olive in. So we can slide that on, and then we've just got a screw that goes in the back. So we can just tighten that down. You don't have to go crazy with these. You don't want to be crushing your suspension arm. So you just want to nip it up. And then it says you should have 0 gap at the end of the ball joint, so let's tighten it up to 0. Then we just need to repeat it for the other side. So we should have some functioning rear arms and a drivable diff. Feels nice and smooth, nothing's binding anywhere. Right, let's see what else we've got. Right, so moving on, we're on to bag 4. So we have two of these things, and they look like plastic, but they don't sound like plastic. They're a weird composite type. So what we're going to need to do, we've basically got one of these. We've got a little grub screw that you're going to need to thread lock. We've got a drive shaft, so we need to make them up first. So we'll get a sprung steel drive shaft. Then we're going to get some more horrible graphite grease. So basically we want one of the pins inside, then we want that, and then a pin that drops through. Make sure it goes straight through into it. And then this time these are going to be held in by the actual bearings. So we want a big bearing on the back, and that's what's going to be holding this, and a smaller bearing on the outside, and this time these are all the sealed bearings. And then we're going to hold all that together with one of the axle bolts or the hex drives. Then once we've got that plopped in, we're going to need our 2.5mm driver, and we're going to want a little bit of Loctite or thread lock. So once we've got us a little grub screw in, we can then tighten that up. See if we can stop a bit of the wear on the output cups. So basically that is going to sit in position there. Now it says you should use 2 + 1 + 1 to make a 3mm spacer, and this is how you will change the wheelbase of the RC. And the stock position, I believe, is the center one. So if we start putting this through and we aim for the center, then as we get it through we can try to get these shims in place. So basically that's how it wants to go, and then we have a lock nut on the end of it, and then you just want to carefully tighten this down, and you don't want to over tighten that. So all it wants to be is snug, so there's no play in it. You're not trying to crush the end of the actual arms at all. Let's just double check that. Yeah, there's plenty tight enough that. So that's one side complete. Now we need to jump across and get this side on. That feels slightly too tight. That's better. Want them nice and loose. Not flapping about, but not binding. Definitely don't want them binding. So that's got the hubs all in place. Now we need to make these lovely things up. Right, so that's both them set to exactly 26.5. We need that on the inside, on the straight one. And we need the olive on the outer side. And looking at that one, right, so that should make up our suspension arms. And then it looks like they're going on that way. So we're going to need a 7mm spacer. And it looks like we're going with the longest screw on the outermost hole. Then our inside one looks like the stock position is the center in the innermost hole, but it's definitely not that screw. So that looks better, and then we need a little locking nut on the end of each one of these. So that one's fitted nice. Now we need to get the other side in, and again we're just looking to nip this up. You're not looking to restrict the movement of the suspension at all. So that's about it for the suspension. Then on the inside we need to mount that. So we'll get that screwed down. So with this one, just got 2 screws to fasten down on it. So it's just these 2. Right, now we just have the rear wing to mount on. So let's have a look how this goes on. And then they're going to screw through into the bulkhead. And then you have the top 2 that come through from the back, and they go into 2 little locking nuts. I do have the torque setting quite low on the electric driver. A bigger driver to push it all the way flat. And it should screw in nicely. Yep, so that's nice and tight. So we have 2 spacers left, 2 big ones. But that is our front diff assembly and front diff hub all fitted. We have the rear suspension, shock tower, sway bar and rear diff assembly and drive shafts all done. So I think we're going to call it a day at that one, because these videos are long enough as they are. So let's wrap this one up. Right, so hopefully this one's not been too long, but we have the front bulkhead, rear assembly, shock tower and the spoiler mount, wing mount, all fitted and all functioning. So, hope you enjoy this. If you do, like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. Don't forget to share to friends and family. I'll catch you guys again in the next one.